Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming and taking time out of your schedules. I know right well that you could be somewhere else doing something else terribly boring and wondering what you could do exciting, and then you decide to come here, right? And we're glad that you're here. We're delighted that you're here. Our time expectations are, you see in the bulletin, roughly we'd like to wind up about 9 o'clock. We have our speakers. I don't know if they're going to stick to your time. You're going to stick to your time, guys? Yeah, that's what I do on Sunday morning, too. Yeah. Well, yeah, sort of, you know. But a couple pragmatic things. One, we have bathrooms on that hallway just as you came in, and we have bathrooms back in that corner, all right? So that might be necessary. And then in the likely event that the cabin should depressurize, we have fire escapes in all 4 directions. And so you can just think about that, just so that you know. You're not familiar with the building, and we know that won't happen, but it might be well to know those facts. Anyways, you have received a pen and a 3x5 card. Is that correct? We hope everyone's got one. And as the speakers share with you this evening, if you have a question, write it down. You might put the name of the person who you want to address the question to, or it can just be a generic question. When Corey has finished sharing with us, we will take a moment to collect those down the rows, and then we will have I will be handing them to Marge, and Marge will be reading them, and somebody appropriate will answer those questions as we go forward from here. Because of the nature of dealing with some deep issues, and you might have family or relatives caught up in the midst of that, we do have members of our prayer teams from this church here. So you see a lot of people walking around with lanyards. That kind of means they're from the church. But if you see ones with blue lanyards, they're prayer team persons, and they would be willing to share with you, maybe to pray for a relative that you're praying for, to help you in that way. So we have 5 things we want you to take home tonight, all right? So they are, 1, hopefully some insights into warning signs. If you see something happen in somebody's life, oh, what's going on there? There are some excellent pamphlets out in the hallway on the table there that also talk about the warning signs. Secondly, there are, as we've learned, you know, on the committee, we just knew nothing, and we're learning some things as we went forward, and we're hoping to share a little bit of that with you tonight. But one is there are some simple remedies, and we hope you go home with some simple remedies. Disposal of medications is a third one. Resources for help. And then furthering this process, maybe some insights of what you can do and steps you can take as you leave here. One other issue, if you would please silence your phones. You can leave them on. If you have to text somebody in the middle saying, you're an exciting event, you better get here, that's okay. But you know how annoying it is when that phone is going off and suddenly your brain goes, that's my phone, man. So if you would do that for us. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we know that you are the one that's in charge of this world, but you've also placed into our hands responsibility to care for one another and help each other, and to see when there are problems and to address them. We thank you for your presence here. We ask for your Holy Spirit to work amongst us as we share this evening, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Our first speaker is Pat Reinert. You see some of the information about him in the bulletin. He is Assistant U.S. Attorney, and he is also the Commanding General of the 88th Readiness Division of the U.S. Army Reserve. Patrick, come and share with us.
Hopefully everyone does have their cell phones off, because if your cell phone goes off and it's I fought the law won, I might have to go for my phone too. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of define what the opioid crisis is, understand the link between street opioids, whether it's heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, furanyl fentanyl, cyclopropyl fentanyl, all that stuff that's out on the street right now, and that link between that and prescription medications. Talk about what we're trying to do as a prevention efforts to help increase prevention efforts, treatment efforts, and understand the general parameters of the enforcement efforts that we're working on. Could you play that video, please? Could you hit play for me? This program is really designed to help kind of educate larger groups about the challenges that we have, because you may not see this in your personal life, but you'll see it in your community, if not now, soon. Right now, 91 people a day die from opioid overdose, every day in America. 144 die of drug overdoses overall, but 91 of those are from opioids. 3 out of 4 new heroin users report previous abuse of opioids. I can tell you from talking to a lot of witnesses that I've had, that is an underreported number. It's probably 99% of all current heroin users started out with opioid abuse of pills through medication. You know, in America, we consume, we have less than 5% of the population, but we consume over 75% of the prescriptions. So that, and over 99% of the hydrocodone, 81% of the oxycodone. So the opioid pain medications are really awash in our society. This is the rise of heroin. You'll see, looking along, it's relatively steady from 99 through about 2010. About 2010, we really hit a large spike in heroin use and heroin deaths, drug poisonings involving heroin. And some have linked that to the pill crisis that was kind of going on in this time. And once we started clamping down on doctors and pain medication and pain clinics, that folks switched to street opioids. That was about the time that the Mexican cartels also started planting more acres to poppy than they did to marijuana. You know, by region, heroin deaths by region are up across the country. But when you look at this line is the Midwest, you know, 2000, 2007, 2013, the rate of change in the Midwest outpaces the rest of the country. We have more overdose deaths in heroin in the Midwest than any other part of the country as a rate of change. This is a different way to look at it. It's a heat map. Blue is good, means people aren't dying. Red means people are dying. Nationally, you see in 2002, virtually the whole country is blue, with just a few spots of red. By 2014, we have more and more red in the country, and even in our state, we've gotten more red in 2014 than in 2002, and that's deaths by county reported by the state medical examiner's office. This chart is deaths by any opioid, 2000 to 2015, so a 15-year study. So any opioid, whether it's, you know, prescription pain medication, heroin, fentanyl, anything else. The blue line here is just heroin, and these are the synthetic opioids, which would be like fentanyl, carfentanil, that kind of thing. This is just Iowa data. 2005 to 2016, treatment admissions, 608 in 2005, 2,200 by 2016. Deaths where opioid is a contributing factor, 59 in 2005 and over 180 statewide in 2016. So the rate of death is astronomical. ER visits, opioid as a causal or contributing factor, why they went to the hospital. And that ski slope continues to go up and up and up. This is a little more local data that I got from Lynn County, and I chose Lynn County mostly because I live there and that's where I was facing the challenge that I had. I'm a prosecutor there. I knew I had 20 deaths in 2015. So I looked back at the police department and said, all right, what's your calls for service? Calls for service, 911 calls saying, hey, somebody's overdosing, come out with an ambulance. We had 60. Well, I've taken my kids to the emergency room lots of times. You want to know how many times they've ridden in an ambulance? 0. So we talked to the hospital. 330 hospitalization admissions, whether somebody walked in, was dropped off, drove in, or came by ambulance that year. By 2016, we had 27 deaths in 2016. With over 874 hospitalizations. 2017, we had 28 deaths and well over 1,000 hospitalizations. Now the rate between 20 and 330 versus 28 and 1,000, bending that death curve, I think, is in part education programs and naloxone treatment. Having Narcan on the street in first responders' hands in sufficient quantity has been helpful. Our emergency rooms, our ambulance crews, our police officers, a lot of folks are carrying Narcan that can really bring them back quickly. Now, how does it start? Some people say, how does it start? Generally, virtually all the people I talk to, it starts with some kind of injury, whether it's an athletic injury in high school, rolling a four-wheeler, going back doing something, other kid stuff, too fast, and you get on the pill. Some folks will transition immediately from an opioid prescription to an abuse of the prescription to a street opioid. Some of them simply remember that endorphin rush, that feeling that they had, and years later when they're in a challenging time in their life, they go back to it. But generally it will start with a prescription pain medication of some sort. Then the progression will work from an injury, prescription for opioids, recreational use of some sort, when the prescription runs out or you can no longer get it from a physician, whether through doctor shopping, and that's why the PMP, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and the pharmacists, I will say, are the best at the PMP in the state. You're much better than the docs. But then you'll get to a street opioid because an oxycodone pill on the street is, I think usually about $80, $10 a milligram, whereas a same dose of a heroin or street opioid is about a third of that cost. So the cost factor fits in, and folks will switch to a street opioid, which is much more dangerous because you never know what you're going to get. When you look at pain management, morphine is kind of the gold standard that everything is measured by. Heroin is 3 times more potent than morphine, and it's derived from the opium poppy. Although Afghanistan produces the most opium in the world, that's not our problem. That's mostly that's the Russian problem. That's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and going up into Russia. That's where all the Afghan poppy tends to go. Most of the opium or heroin that comes here is usually produced in Mexico or South America. And it can be snorted, it can be eaten, it can be shot up, pretty much any one of those methods of delivery. Fentanyl is one that's hitting the street now more potently. We used to have heroin that was 3 to 5% pure. Then we got to heroin that was 100% pure. Now we're seeing heroin that's generally cut with fentanyl or carfentanil or other opioids, because fentanyl can be produced in a laboratory. You don't need to have a plant. You don't need to have an opium poppy. You don't have to do any kind of production. It's just a lab-produced product. So it's easier to produce clandestinely in Mexico and other countries. Fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine. It is available in like patches and that kind of thing that people have chronic pain. They might be on a fentanyl patch. You'll see it frequently in like emergency room crash carts, ambulances, that kind of thing, because it is a legitimate pain medication. A fatal dose of fentanyl is about 1/1000th of a gram. If you take think about a sugar pack, it's about a gram of material. A normal dose that you would find someone using a street opioid is about 1/10 of a gram. So you take that sugar packet, cut up in 10 lines. You take that 1/10 of a gram line and cut it 100 times. That's 1/1000th of a gram. That is a fatal dose of fentanyl. Looking at it a different way, fatal dose of heroin on the left, fatal dose of fentanyl on the right. So just a few little grains are fatal. And that's one of the challenges that you have. Most of the drugs that are clandestinely produced, if fentanyl is mixed into it, it's not going to be like a pharmaceutical manufactured product that everything is evenly distributed. They're going to mix it up in a blender, and you're going to have hot spots in the bag. You might have some folks that will get all the fentanyl, some folks will get none of it. So that becomes the risk. Quality control is not a drug dealer's long suit. Carfentanil, the only legitimate use is as an animal tranquilizer for elephants. It is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. It's clandestinely produced in labs in China, Mexico, all over. 100 times more potent than fentanyl. This is that same fatal dosage. Heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil. The carfentanil fatal dose is right there. Now, to get a size piece of it, that little grain of carfentanil that is fatal will fit in Lincoln's ear on a penny. So those of you who don't just use your credit card to buy stuff, you can look at a penny. Lincoln's ear is kind of small. And what we're seeing is lots and lots. This is just looking at the analogs. Back in 2014, all we saw was heroin. 2015 and on, now we're seeing fentanyl and all these different mixtures of unusual substances. They're all opioids. They're all clandestinely produced, and they will have different effects at different strengths and different lethalities. So it's all across the board. And this, if I had 2018 data up, it would be more complex than that. Some of those are controlled substances. Some of them are analogs of controlled substances. So it creates an interesting legal issue to try and prosecute all of them. Heroin comes from the opium poppy. That's an opium poppy that they score and they kind of milk the poppy. It's like making maple syrup. Got to get that off and then you process it. Usually it's manufactured. Most of ours here in Mexico or South America. It'll be delivered through any kind of traditional drug trafficking methods, whether it's going to a larger city to pick it up, meeting on the street. The mailman right now delivers an awful lot of stuff, especially in our rural areas, because a lot of the drugs will be ordered over the internet, whether it's straight from China or other folks, and it gets delivered that way. So that is a big challenge for customs to seize all the drugs coming in from China. But it's delivered all kinds of ways, and it'll be delivered in lots of forms. It could be liquid, pills. The pills generally are counterfeit pills. They will look like an oxycodone. They might look like, we have a case pending where we seized over 800 pills that looked like oxycodone, and some of the pills were alprazolam, and some of them were carfentanil. And that creates a challenge. You can't really trust what the pill even looks like, because people will buy a pill press and they'll buy the equipment to make any kind of pill look like anything else. This is what an 30 milligram oxy looks like. That's what we seized. So had we just looked at the stamp and looked it up on drugs.com, we would have said, hey, this is oxycodone. We sent it to the lab. It was mostly, we had alprazolam, carfentanil, and cyclopropylfentanyl. Some pills were all carfentanil, some were cyclopropylfentanyl, and some were alprazolam. So that kind of mixture. So when someone's buying this on the street, they think they're buying oxycodone. They don't know what they're going to get. So in addition to pills, we talked about snorting and injecting. Generally, the folks, when I'm talking to them about their use history, they usually will start with snorting, and then ultimately after that doesn't have the same effect or the effect that they want, they will switch to injection. Now, usually injection is really kind of toward the end of the use cycle, because it goes in faster and a much more intense high. So if someone gets a really high dose of a fentanyl or a carfentanil or a strong dose of heroin, many times we will find them with a needle still in their arm. The effects of opioid use, warm flushing to the skin, dry mouth, heavy feeling, you get heavy breathing, drowsiness. Frequently their heart rate will slow significantly, their breathing will slow significantly. And once that breathing slows enough, they get what the medical folks call agonal breathing. It sounds like a heavy snoring, kind of like sleep apnea on steroids. They'll stop breathing periodically. They'll breathe maybe twice a minute. They'll turn blue. They'll get cyanotic. And ultimately, they will drown in their own fluids. And that, when you saw on the film, they had the kid laying there with a little bit of white foam. That's called the foam cone. So when someone actually dies of an overdose, they'll find that froth around their mouth. And this is why people continue to use, even though it's a horribly dangerous thing. People have described withdrawal as like the worst flu you've ever had. Bone pain, muscle aches, vomiting, fever, chills, the worst you've ever had, multiplied by 5 for multiple weeks. And any small dose of an opioid will reverse that immediately. And this opioid withdrawal will happen daily. So every day, that opioid addiction has to be fed. And that's really what drives it. It's not about getting high, it's about not being sick. So once someone really is in that addiction cycle, it is about trying to stay right with the world. So the heroin dealers frequently that we're looking at, they'll sell first thing in the morning for people who are still working, and they'll sell right at night before they go to bed. During the day, if folks are out working or they're doing other things to get money, that's going to be a kind of a downtime for them. But that tends to be the normal, regular, business-like cycle. And this really is, the cycle. You start first with that opioid, get into regular use. This will be repeated many times. People will go to treatment many, many times because opioids are extremely difficult to get off of, not only because of the withdrawals and everything else, but because it changes your brain chemistry. This treatment cycle will happen a lot, but ultimately there are only two end states. It's either recovery or death. So some folks will say, where's the money come from? Because an average dose of a street opioid, whether it's heroin or fentanyl or carfentanil, because they don't sell it as fentanyl, they always sell it as strong heroin, it's going to be $20 to $30 per tenth of a gram, once or twice a day. Since you do the withdrawals at least that often, you got to do that. So you're going to have upwards of a $100 a day habit, $36,000 to $70,000 a year just to feed that opium challenge. Just to deal with that crisis, you've got to have that kind of money. And it will come. First, people will have a regular job. As the addiction takes hold and they have a harder time holding a job, then everything will be pawned. Things will be stolen. I've talked to parents who have told me that when their child came over, they had to lock up all the silverware, anything valuable, everything had to go in the safe because it was going to be stolen. Property crimes, theft, forgery. We seize a lot of the food stamp cards, the EBT cards. We seize those in heroin dealers' houses all the time because people will give them their EBT card and just to get regular doses of heroin. Financial fraud, purchasing Sudafed because people still make meth around here somehow. I don't know why, but they do. And they'll get Sudafed, so people will buy Sudafed and trade that for heroin. Drug crimes, middling crimes, where they'll make a transaction for a friend in order to get some of the heroin themselves. Virtually every one of my female witnesses who have been struggling with abuse will end up talking about either being propositioned or having to engage in sexual acts in exchange for opioids. It happens frequently. So we started to think about how to get after this problem in our office, and we realized it's not really a one-trick pony. You can't just enforce crime. You can't just arrest your way out of the problem. But you also can't prevent it all, and you can't do treatment only. You got to do all three. It really is the triple strand of strength. Ropes are stronger when they're woven together. And if you have each of those three components, you can actually make a difference. So we try to improve our prevention efforts, facilitate the transition to treatment, and then also do some vigorous enforcement. So on the prosecution end, I teach regularly to law enforcement about how to investigate overdoses as crimes. In fact, I taught today in Calhoun County about how to investigate overdose scenes as crime scenes, because we can actually prosecute those cases. We can get up to 20-year mandatory minimum for someone who actually causes a death or an injury. If they've got a prior drug felony, they can go to prison for the rest of their natural life. We've done that on a number of occasions. We just have to show, but for the use of the controlled substance, whether it's methamphetamine or heroin, the person would still be living or wouldn't be injured. And we can do injured cases as well. So we do those. I think I've got 10 or 15 of those set in my office right now to try and work through. In state court, if death occurs, you can potentially get some charges in state court as well, so the county attorneys have some tools available. Their issue is if no death occurs, there really is not a whole lot of great tools in state court. And even if they have a death, to try and get it in state court, you got to prove recklessness, that the drug delivery was reckless in some way. And it's a multi-factor test and pretty difficult to do. So some county attorneys are used to do them more frequently or are a little more reluctant to do them because of the 2015 Iowa appellate case. We do first responder training to teach them how to write reports, talk to the EMTs about how to document the effects of Narcan, how to testify effectively, because the one thing that, the number one fear in America is not, what is it? Anybody know? Number two is snakes. Number one is public speaking. Most people would rather hold a live snake in their hand than talk in public. So that's the issue that our EMTs and law enforcement officers have, is talking in public and testifying is sometimes unnerving. So we try and teach them how to do that, how to prepare to testify. This is a case we did a couple years ago. This is Max Wright. Max is serving the rest of his natural life in prison. He was the drug kingpin of a conspiracy We had 2 deaths and 4 overdoses not resulting in death that Max was responsible for. He was not the guy that delivered the drugs. He had people below him. He was 3 levels up from the ultimate delivery. So we're able to take the federal statute and work all the way up the chain with a strict liability standard. Prevention efforts, I spent a lot of time talking to doctors, providers about alternates to opioids, trying to explore those, looking at issues related to prescribing, encouraging them to use the PMP program, teach them a little bit what doctor shopping looks like in case a doctor doesn't know what doctor shopping looks like, and really encourage them to use the PMP. So I would challenge you all when you go to your doctor time to ask your doctor to PMP me. Just say that, PMP me. Make them look you up in the prescription monitoring program to make sure that you're not a doctor shopper. If we can get them into the habit of doing that, they will help tamp down and help us with prevention efforts. So just encourage your providers to do that. Doctors are only at about 41% of Iowa doctors. I think the pharmacists are up in the 80s or 90s. I mean, you guys are, the pharmacists are awesome at getting that stuff done. And they're actually one of the best lines of defense that we've got. Accessibility is an issue. We always encourage people, if you've got prescription medication at home, do not keep it in your medicine cabinet, because medicine cabinets are in bathrooms, which are private places. People can go in there, can close the door. You're never going to know that somebody's going to steal your pills. And odds are you don't know how many pills you actually have in that bottle. So if you've got an opioid pain medication, a couple of options. Lock it up like a gun, or put it out in your kitchen cabinet in the public areas where folks can see it, where you can see it if somebody's getting into it. That is one way to help keep that medication from going missing, because when someone can't get it from a doctor, they're going to try and steal it from a family or friend first. Get rid of those excess medications that you've got. Pitch the pills. This is actually the Cedar Rapids Police Department box. Yes, it looks like a mailbox, and yes, we borrowed it from the post office and repainted it. Apparently, we weren't supposed to do that, but they told us that after we had about half a dozen boxes like that. We now have prescription take-back places in 202 sites in all 99 counties in the state. When we started this, we only had about 50 of the counties covered. Now is virtually, a lot of law enforcement offices have permanent boxes back. A number of the pharmacies do, so pretty much every county will have a pharmacy or a law enforcement box where you can actually drop those excess pills off and get rid of them. Those boxes are cleaned out, like the law enforcement boxes are cleaned out when the DEA does their drug take-back. I think we took back 2,000 pounds of medication last year at the last take-back, and they estimate 10% of that was opioids. That's a lot of opioids on the street. Other prevention efforts, I talk to anybody who will listen to me, whether it's in schools, nurses, counselors. I talk to school audiences. I talk to kids in school. We talk to community groups like this to help get the word out on spreading prevention efforts. Treatment, I think somebody else will probably talk about treatment a little more than I will, but because the pharmacist actually knows what he's talking about. I've just seen Narcan in action. When it works, it is quick. The folks will come out of their overdose quickly. The danger of it is if you've got it, you got to make sure you get to the emergency room anyway, because Narcan will last shorter time than the opioid will be in your system. It knocks that opioid off the mu receptor in your brain, but it still stays in your system floating around. And when the Narcan wears out, the opioid will reattach. So some people can overdose from the same amount every time. And the stronger the opioid, the more Narcan you need. One of the cases I did, I think they gave her 4 doses of Narcan. The last one was they dumped it down the trach tube to get it into her lungs. So it's tough stuff. There is an Iowa standing order to dispense, so with trading, anybody can get Narcan that has a need for it. First responders, people who have someone who's suffering from an addiction can get that. Anybody's in a position to assist. Suboxone is one of the treatments that's available. It's a long-lasting opioid, low dose, not subject to, there is some dependence, some risk of overdose, but it's much reduced. Doctors have to prescribe it, can only have 100 patients or fewer. There are not a ton of docs that have the ability to prescribe Suboxone in the state, but that number is going up all the time. It is limited coverage by Medicaid. Methadone is not covered by Medicaid in the state of Iowa. Methadone is an everyday dosage. that someone takes. It is an opioid. Can cause withdrawal if you don't get the dose, but ultimately they're supposed to be, the doctor will measure them and step them down to a lower and lower and lower dose until they're finally opioid free, but it takes a long time. Naltrexone, long-lasting naltrexone is a shot. The brand name is Vivitrol. It's kind of like when they created antabuse back in the 60s for people who had alcohol abuse issues, that if they take an opioid, they get sick. That's what Vivitrol does. It lasts 28 days, but you got to be opioid free for at least 14 days. Not yet covered by Medicaid in the state of Iowa, and it's really expensive, like $1,600 a shot. Right now, we started an inmate recovery program in Lynn County based upon that, because the manufacturer of Vivitrol would give us the first shot free. So if somebody detoxes in jail and wants to get treatment, they're reviewed by, we have ASAC, our drug treatment professionals will talk to them, help them set them up on a program, get them a Vivitrol shot before they leave, which keeps them opioid free for at least 28 days while we can get those abstinence-based programs like NA and AA to work. Cedar Rapids Police Department has the Safe Place Project, where basically if anybody wants to get off the drugs that they're on, they can come in, and it's like, you know, the old Army amnesty box. You got a little extra ammo from the range, you drop it off in the amnesty box. Same kind of principle. They can drop off the drugs, drop off their paraphernalia. They won't get arrested, and the police officer will help get them information about getting into recovery. Because really it is all about community partnerships. Nobody can do it alone. It's not a DEA problem. It's not a federal law enforcement problem. It is a national epidemic that requires a community solution and all the partners to work together to make it all happen. And Al makes me say this. Al Fear is my law enforcement partner. He started Crush of Eastern Iowa, which is really Community Resources United to Stop Heroin. And his goal is to set up a Crush chapter in every county in the state, where folks can come together in community groups of action to help figure out the local problems and the local solutions to those problems by working together. So if you want any help on those, setting that kind of chapter up, please get a hold of me and I'll get you in touch with Al, and he'll hook you up on becoming a Crush chapter. Really, recovery is possible. It is a national epidemic. It requires us all to work together. That's my contact information on there. I know y'all can see it really well on that big screen. But feel free to get a hold of me if you have any questions or issues later, and we'll have questions, I guess, at the end.
Sharing with us next is Bob Cook. Bob and his wife Cheryl had the tragic reality of their 23-year-old daughter dying because of a heroin overdose. And so Bob is going to share with us on that. And then also, we ask you to pray for Bob, because on March 10th, his wife Cheryl was killed in a tragic car accident. And he has decided to be with us regardless and share. But we ask you to support him as he shares with us.
The number of opioid overdose deaths in Iowa is trending up. One of those lives lost so far this year belonged to 23-year-old Brittany Cook of Johnston. Last month, her parents wrote her a painfully blunt obituary. I recently sat down with them to find out why.
Somebody had said, oh, you know, you hate that phone call in the middle of the night, that your child's been in an accident or this or that. The other day, we both looked at each other and said, no, it's the knock on the door. It's the knock on the door that you don't want to happen.
Bob and Cheryl Cook knew when the doorbell rang, their deepest fear, the nightmare that haunted them for 5 years, was now a reality.
The night before, we didn't know it, but we both went to bed and said, please, God, we'll take her pain if you will. give her peace.
Mm-hmm.
No, we didn't mean peace not here with us on earth.
Brittany's heroin addiction began when she was 18. She was introduced by a friend. Bob describes his daughter's quick transition from free-spirited, funny girl to addict with one word.
In and out of treatment.
We had thousands of dollars stolen out of the checking account. Every piece of jewelry hawked except for her wedding ring.
The cooks say the demon, known as heroin, possessed their daughter, despite their best efforts to prevent it.
We were very active in Brittany's lives. I mean, I was basketball coach, she was softball coach. We did everything with her.
It can affect you at any point.
It can still happen.
Bob, a former paramedic, and Cheryl, a nurse at an addiction rehab center, adopted Brittany as a baby. Knowing there was addiction in her birth family's history, they warned her when she was young.
We said, Brittany, because of your genetics, you are predisposed to this, so it may only take one time, and that'll be it for you.
Always eager for fun with her friends, she tried it. The 5 years that followed were filled with recovery and relapse until the final overdose that ended her life.
Elephant tranquilizer, thinking they were getting heroin.
That's what Brittany
Because that's what Brittany died from, was elephant tranquilizer.
If they had everything their way, the cooks would never have had to write their only daughter's obituary. If they had even one thing their way, they would have written only about her warm personality, how she loved to laugh.
At her funeral, one of her girlfriends, she had recorded her on a telephone call, and it's called The Laugh. And it's just Brittany in the middle of a conversation with Amy, one of her girlfriends, and she starts giggling. It goes on and on.
But they decided that focusing only on the good, the laughter, would be a disservice to Brittany and to others. For them, addiction is no longer a secret.
They don't choose to have that addictive personality and end up in that state of addiction.
Though it's too late for Brittany, the cooks are now devoted to shining the light and shattering the stigma of opioid addiction.
It is an epidemic, and it is out of control. It's got to help somebody out there.
Tomorrow night in a special State of Addiction broadcast, we take a closer look at
Sorry guys, I had to step out for a second. That's kind of a video that I have a hard time watching anyway, so definitely with circumstances that have happened here in the last 30 days. So. Just going to give you a little perspective of what it is to be a parent of a child with addiction. And this is a little tribute to my wife. Yeah, I guess I printed these a little bit small, sorry. Brittany was born January 17th, 1994. I remember that day because it was actually the day of the LA earthquakes, and it was cold and we had a bad snowstorm going on. And we're sitting in the waiting room waiting for her to be born. We actually adopted Brittany as an infant, and it was a private adoption, so we were there during the delivery, and I got to cut the cord and everything. We actually took her home from the hospital, so she was our gift from God, as we always said. Gotta love technology, don't you? There we go. When we were always open with Brittany that she was adopted, never hid that fact from her, thought it was appropriate that she knew. She came from, or became a part of our big family, 19 aunts and uncles, 21 cousins. She was our daughter, whether a blood test said she was or not. She attended Catholic grade school in Des Moines at St. Teresa's until 6th grade. We moved to Ohio when she started 7th grade, and we spent 5 years there. She went to public school out there, and then when we moved back to Des Moines, she went to Roosevelt High School and ended up dropping out at the end of her junior year. Just a few pictures of Britt growing up, different family members, different situations there. Where Brittany's trouble started, she unfortunately had ADHD. As the psychologist or psychiatrist that treated Brittany when she was little said, you know, she was like a squirrel on crack, as he put it. She just had a really hard time controlling it, and she was on a pretty significant dose of medicines to keep it under control. So that was kind of a fight for her all along. While we were out in Ohio, there was a church not too far around the corner from where we lived, and a couple friends of hers went to a youth group there. One night, much to my chagrin, they talked about adoption. And the person who was talking to these young teenagers told them that adoption was wrong, and that your universe will never be right until you're back with your biological family. Unfortunately, she told me this as I was down the street, and I was actually turning around because I was going back and have a little conversation with this gentleman, and she proceeded to not, or talk me out of it, I guess as you could say. I did have a conversation with the pastor, though, because that was definitely not a conversation to have with any kids, anybody that's been adopted, as far as I was concerned. At that point, she wanted to connect with her biological parents. She knew that her mom and dad, both of them, had a history of substance abuse, and she was afraid that she would never get that opportunity to meet them. We did make connection with her biological mother, and Brittany and Sherry made a road trip down to Rogers, Arkansas, where her biological mother lived, and they got a chance to meet. Unfortunately, with her history of substance abuse, we found out years later that that was still actually an issue with her mom at the time of the visit, so there was a little exposure there. We always told Brittany because we knew of the history of her biological parents, that she was at a much higher possibility of becoming addicted herself, and that she needed to be very cautious of that. We had those conversations with her on multiple occasions. I think that unfortunate teenage, I can do anything and stop whenever I want, kind of played into that factor, and she didn't take that to heart. While she was in her sophomore year, she had to have a substance abuse evaluation because she didn't like taking her ADHD medicine, always stuffed it in her purse, took it to school with her. Somebody told that she had pills in her purse, so we had to go through the substance abuse treatment program. And unfortunately, I think there again, being that teenager, they don't take it seriously, and it ends up introducing you, they kind of think of it as a joke, and it introduces you to people in the treatment centers that have bigger addictions and harder drugs that than what you're doing at that point. So that ended up kind of backfiring a little bit. Once back in Iowa, that kind of spiral downward kind of continued. When she dropped out of school, we told her that, there isn't a free ride. You're going to have to get a full-time job or go back to school, one or the other. So at that point, she got a job working for one of the local pizza chains, and that place pretty much ended up being nothing but a distribution center. And that's where she got exposed to the harder drugs, the meth and the heroin. So for 5 years, as I put it there, it's our journey through hell once we figured out what was going on. We actually found out Brittany was addicted to heroin by accident. Her and her boyfriend at that point were having an argument in the car. They were on our way over to our house, and she butt dialed us, and we could hear them arguing in the background and heard them talking about wanting to go to treatment and getting help, and he did, and she wasn't quite ready for that point yet. We tried, once we figured that out, we tried to go through the court process to get her committed. They didn't seem to see the need for it at that point. Took every legal action we could at that point to force her to get treatment. We actually even, or she ended up moving back in with us for a period of time, which led to another set of issues. We'd found out that she had raided our checking account on a couple different occasions for several $1,000s both times. She stole every piece of jewelry that Sherry had. My wedding ring, the only 2 rings that Sherry had left were ones that she wore all the time, which was her birthstone and her wedding ring. Mine I didn't wear very often because I was working at the hospital a lot at that point, so it was always off because I didn't want to lose it, so lo and behold. At that point, we had to pursue legal action just to try to get her some help, force that help on her. So we actually went to the police and filed charges against her for theft, and that started the whole legal process going through, which is good and bad there too, unfortunately. She was in 4 different treatment programs, 6 different times over the course of that 5-year period. She actually even spent 7 months in Mitchellville's women's correctional facility. They actually had a treatment program at that point, which truthfully was a very good program because it taught them to reintegrate back into society and be respectful in that, because those were the things that when you're doing drugs, you kind of lose that family connection, you lose your friends. You're used to that street life, and that was the cycle that they were trying to break in that program. Unfortunately, the funds for that program got cut, and it's no longer there. She told us the first couple times going through treatment, she was really not ready to be clean yet. Her debt, probably for about the first 18 months or 2 years. After a couple years, then she started to realize how much that drug had a hold of her and was controlling her life. She didn't have control over it anymore. And I can tell you, dozens and dozens of times, she would sit there and cry. I wished I could be sober. I wished I could go back to the day, that very first time that I shot heroin. I would never, ever, ever do it again if I knew what I knew now. I would love nothing more than to be sober. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the cards. She did do the medication-assisted programs, methadone and Suboxone, with some success. Unfortunately, she didn't follow through on all the treatment programs and that, which they didn't enforce either, so it wasn't as successful as that could have been. After she was released from jail February 18th of last year, she got into my pickup, and she had become part of a Bible study program in Polk County. And she walked out, and they had given her a Bible there in jail. And she said, Dad, she said, I got to read this passage to you. It's my new, how I'm going to succeed and get through life. And it's the passage that talks about going through the narrow gate. Sorry, I can't read that one either. But if you get a chance later, you can look and see she's been through here and highlighted all kinds of passages and that through the Bible, and most of them have to do with that, process of being sober, trying to forgive yourself, trying to regain your way again. She did okay for the first 10 days, 12 days. She was in the process. She had a boyfriend at that point and was going to move in with him and his son. He had a 2-year-old boy. On March 3rd, she got into an argument with him in the middle of the night and called one of her friends And they came, picked her up about 3:30 or so. And that was the last time that David or Sherry and I seen her. I did have a text message from her the next day. I tried calling her a couple times. She wouldn't answer the phone, which was typical when she was out getting high. I sent her a text message, and she sent me one back and said, well, David kicked me out of the house. You know, it was the typical, usually there was always an excuse as to why she went back to using again. She did leave everything behind this time, which was a little unusual. Typically when she was headed back out to make it a long-term situation, everything went in trash bags and it went with her, and then it got left wherever she was at the last time. So this time everything stayed behind, so we kind of had a feeling it wasn't going to be a very long event. Like I said, the last communication with her was the text message, and actually the one that I sent her that said, you know, at least you could let us send us a text every day, letting us know that you're alive. That was the last one I sent to her. Spoke with her boyfriend several times during that day and a half time period, because he was worried about her too, but he also had a 2-year-old boy there at home, so he had to also be concerned about her. March 4th, last year. For some reason that day, I had an easy peace feeling all day, which was very, very unusual to have when Brittany was out, because usually you always had that pit in your stomach that, oh my God, what if something happens? That day I didn't have it. 8:25 p.m. I was literally stepping into the shower when the doorbell rang. I knew when the doorbell rang what it was. As I quick threw on a pair of shorts, and when I walked downstairs, we have side lights on our door, and I could see a Johnston officer standing off to the side of the door. So I knew what I was going to open the door for. As I opened the door, standing behind him was a friend of ours who happens to be a medical examiner investigator for Polk County. I opened the door and just said, "Where did you find her?" And I remember going up and telling my wife, and her screaming through the house that this could not be true. This is the nightmare that you never want to live through, coming true with our house. And by the way, my wife talked about the phone call in the middle of the night. I got that a month ago, and that's not any better than the knock on your door, trust me. Some pictures of Brittany. This is how we remember her. The fun-loving, she had a heart of gold. When she was clean and sober, she was the best kid anybody could ask for. She was just a wonderful, wonderful person. When that drug had a hold of her, she was the devil walking around. Things to watch for, like you talked about a little while ago, just kind of recap these real quick. The big mood swings. They will go from happy 1 second to literally off the chart, physically wanting to fight you the next. The lethargy and the depression. And they tend to be very isolated from family and friends. You could always tell when she was out getting high because she didn't want to have any conversation with you. Her friends that she typically hung around with didn't hear from her anymore. Inability to maintain those typical behaviors, jobs, relationships, family, those type of things. Hygiene is also another issue. It's amazing how after being around them for a while, you could always tell when she's high because when they sweat, you can smell the drugs coming out of their sweat. So there's an odor. It's kind of like I always said with drunk drivers, you could always tell when somebody was drunk because you can smell the alcohol in their blood if they're bleeding. And they also have that new group of friends that they hang out with that you've never seen before. They are constantly having money issues. They're always trying to figure out where they're going to get money from, how, if they're living out on their own, how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to eat, all that kind of stuff, where they're, or she's living on the street, how to get money for a hotel room, whatever, that type of thing. And dishonesty becomes a real issue. We had a counselor tell us once that, when they're active, everything's a lie until proven otherwise. And unfortunately, that's a sad statement, but that ends up being true when they're using. Here we go. You get the physical appearance changes. You'll see some pictures here of her in just a little bit. The acne and the sores on their arms because they tend to pick and things like that. You'll obviously see the needle tracks, that kind of stuff. So those are all definite signs that something's going on. And then they also get involved in the criminal activity. Brittany told me when she was in Mitchellville, there was at one point in her addiction that she was spending between $300 and $500 a day to feed her habit. So you don't make that kind of money legally, unfortunately. And she was, like he was talking earlier, she did a lot of the middlemanning and the other activities to support the habit. And unfortunately, those were the things that she had problems getting past. She couldn't forgive herself for. And that was a big struggle for her. She ended up in Broadlawns for 4 days one time on a ventilator for 2 of them because of an overdose. She was with her boyfriend and overdosed, and he drove her to the hospital, which was about 5 minutes away, and luckily they got her back that time. She shouldn't have. How that ended up happening, I have no idea, but that was God watching out for her that day. These are some numbers that I've used. I've done a few of these talks with Dr. Schmunk, who's the Polk County Medical Examiner, and I, so we kind of swap statistics back and forth. More Americans died of drug overdoses in 2016 than all the soldiers died in Vietnam. There was, 58,220. 1 year, there was almost 64,000 people died in 2016 from overdose deaths. At the peak of car crashes in 1972, 55,000 people a year were dying. HIV and AIDS at its peak was 43,000 a year. And from gun violence at its peak in 1993 of just about 40,000. The trend has been increasing 15 to 20% a year. Polk County, 2016 was 67 deaths, as it said on the video. Dr. Schmunk told me almost officially was 110. Brittany's one of those numbers for 2017. Getting close to double in 1 year. Some things I hope that you'll take away from my information. Addiction is a disease. It is not something that they choose. It is not something that they ever want. And unfortunately, with addiction comes that stigma. Lord knows we hid what was going on in Brittany's life for 4.5 of the 5 years, because as parents you're embarrassed. It's like, what did I did something wrong raising my child. No, this is a disease, and it can happen to any single person in this room. It does not care. This does not affect the junkies, as you typically want to hear, or the people that live in the lower income areas of town. It affects lower income, middle income, high income, doctors, lawyers. I know of people in executive positions with very large corporations that are in prison right now because of addictions. It does not care who it affects. any single person it can happen to. Doesn't make an age or income amount. And it's our kids that it's really affecting. Jail and prison are not the answer for it. We cannot, like he said, we cannot incarcerate our way out of this problem. Treatment is definitely one of the key things to helping them survive this disease. Unfortunately, my personal opinion is, I think treatment, there's still things that need to be done to change the treatment process because we're not having the success with treatment that we should be having at this point. And most of the successful programs are truly a year long. Most of them are doing a 60 to 90 day inpatient, and then they give them, send them to a sober living, and so that they can continue to get the help and have somebody guide them back into society so that they can be more successful. The 30-day treatment programs don't tend to be, I don't think, as successful because most people will tell you it takes 60 days just to get the drugs out of their system. So at 30 days, they're not even really clean by the time they leave. Penalties for the drug traffickers and the higher end dealers need to be severe. They need to punish these people because these are the people that, they don't do the drugs. They're smart enough to understand that this is going to control my life and that's not going to happen. So these are the ones who are making money strictly off of it, and it's a business for them. And they don't care what the outcome is. Somebody dies today, somebody will take their place tomorrow. I watched Drugs Inc. on National Geographic one night, and the dealer was putting fentanyl in his heroin, and he said, I make 6 to 8 what they call hot loads, which is they lace it with heroin. And he said, I know I'll probably lose, 4 to 6 of them. They'll probably overdose, but everybody will hear about where they got their heroin from, and my business will go up. So, stellar individual. Those are the guys that need to be behind bars for the rest of their life. In narcotics, I worked in healthcare for 20 years. I was part of that era of pain as the fifth vital sign. JACO and the insurance companies wanted you to do patient satisfaction scores, and that's what they based your reimbursement off of. Pain was one of those things that they asked you about. Doctors did not like to treat pain because of the concern of the opiate addiction. Hospitals start telling them, we don't care, you got to treat them, because our reimbursements are going down and our patient satisfaction scores are going down. So now we swing the pendulum the other direction, and is definitely a contributing factor to where we're at today. According to the CDC, there were 33,091 deaths in 2015, and that's quadrupled since 1999. And like I said, in 2016, the last numbers I could find online, there were 63,600 plus that died of overdoses. I've seen an article about a year or so ago that talked about the children that are being affected by this. They estimated 3.2 million children have been affected from the opioid crisis, either by their parents dying, being incarcerated, or living on the streets, and their kids either being in foster care or living with a family member because their parents are not able to take care of them. The week that Brittany died, the pilot, the Spirit Airlines pilot, who lived in Centerville, Ohio, which is a suburb of Dayton. Their 3 children, walked in and found them, the wife and the husband, dead in bed from a heroin overdose. That happened the week that Brittany died. She was one of 4 people that day that had overdosed in Des Moines, and she was the only carfentanil. She was, I think Dr. Smunk said she was one of 3 carfentanil overdoses. He actually has an interesting little diagram that he shows. It talks about the different strengths of the different drugs, and each one gets a little dot. And heroin and morphine, there are a couple dots between them, and then the fentanyl gets 100 or so dots. When it hits the carfentanil, when you print that off, it's 4 pages of dots. So, and this could wipe out a very large portion of our youth, the way it's going. And the biggest thing I want to stress, like I said before, this can happen to anybody in this room, any of their family members, their children, their grandchildren. This is not something where you can take lightly, because if you put your head in the sand and think it's not going to affect you, it will affect you and control you, even though you're not the one, you're not doing the drugs. It'll have control over your life before you know it. So it's not something to take lightly. And don't let our nightmare become your reality. Don't let this be the final thought or memory that you have of your loved one. Thanks.
Bob, we want to thank you for your dedication to coming and sharing with us, even in the midst of your grieving. Thank you. Pat's job was to kind of give us the big picture, right? And Bob has given us the very human picture. Jarek is going to come and share with us. It all starts because there is some good to these things, and then they get twisted. So Jarek's going to talk to us a little from the pharmacist's viewpoint.
I'm going to come up to the podium. Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you for sharing. Powerful message. There's a lot of important information that's coming tonight. I am going to touch a little bit on what I would see from the pharmacy's perspective. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, because this is a big thing. It's affecting our communities. You being here is a big part of the solution. So my name is Jarek Vetter. I'm a pharmacist at Broadlawns Hospital. I've worked there for 5 years. I don't want you to think here's a city boy coming to tell us how to fix the problem, but I want you to know that I used to come to Twin Lakes every summer with my grandparents, Keith and Bobby Lindstrom. So I'm small town, born and bred, and Frank and Marge Conant are very close friends of the family. This is where we're going to fix the problem, is these small communities coming together and standing up for what's going to be the best possible solution for this opioid crisis. Perfect. Okay. So this is where I work. This is Broadlands Hospital, but this is the new building, the medical plaza. That very top floor is our pain management center. We have 8 providers now. I am full-time pharmacist at the pain clinic. We have a full-time clinical psychologist. It is not a very common thing to have a pharmacist and a clinical psychologist in a pain center. We are trying to be ahead of the curve and making sure that we're focusing on pain as a full aspect for someone. We're checking the PMP. That's a very common thing for all of my providers. Every time that the prescription's going out, the PMP is checked. We're making sure that we're doing physical therapy, doing water therapy, chiropractic services, injections. A lot of different things are looked at. Medications are a lot of times our last line, and we're trying to do the safest thing for the community. I think this has been emphasized really well. There's a very big difference that I want to emphasize here: addiction versus dependence. So we've been talking about addiction here. As soon as the medication takes hold and it's in control, that's when we're talking about addiction. If the person cannot, they're stealing money, they're doing things outside of the law to obtain the medications, that's when we're talking about addiction. Dependence is a different thing. Dependence is when your body physically changes to the presence of the drug, where if that's not there anymore, you'll go through withdrawal symptoms. There's a lot of medications that do that. It's not just pain medications. I want to emphasize that people who are on opioid pain medications might have dependence. It does not mean that it's addiction. Everybody who's addicted will have dependence, though. So there's a differentiation there. I want to emphasize it, but as soon as you're seeing any signs of addiction in anyone, that's when we need to get someone else involved and make sure that we're doing the best thing we can for that person. So, what is some of the benefits? So let's kind of touch base here real quick and talk about some of the good things that opioids do provide. So, it's not all bad. I know that it's very common in the news to hear about fentanyl and carfentanil, and just know that they do work in the brain. There's an opioid receptor, the mu receptor, sometimes we refer to it as. It is very effective in pain control. A lot of times you're going to be using this after surgery, after a very painful procedure. If you're in hospice care, if you have cancer pain, there's a lot of different things that there's valid treatments for using these pain medications. That being said, it needs to be used cautiously, and it needs to be the minimum amount to get through that period of pain. Now, if you are just getting done with a surgery and you don't want to take pain medications, it's very possible that you're going to have chronic pain throughout. You'll heal faster if you are not in pain. That being said, I would encourage you to use the minimal amount for the shortest amount of time that you need. Everything should be monitored by your physician, and you can work with your pharmacist too, just to make sure that it's all going appropriate for you. These medications should be used cautiously and should be reserved for these special situations. Now, some of the risks, we've talked about this. That euphoria was mentioned earlier, that you feel like $1 million, everything feels great. It's got an addiction potential. So people who are taking the medication, they might be fighting this withdrawal symptoms, they might be trying to shoot for that euphoria. There's a lot of things that are going to happen as soon as they hit that euphoria that's coming when you're on the cusp of causing all the bad side effects, when you're getting to that respiratory depression situation where you're having difficulty breathing and going through the side effects that can lead to death. Right now I would say we're kind of balancing the pendulum out a little bit, where they can be overprescribed. I will tell you that a lot of physicians are being monitored very closely. There was 5 in Des Moines here very recently who had their licenses revoked for overprescribing. A lot of physicians are being very cautious with prescriptions, as they should be, and everything needs to be monitored very closely. There's not going to be a magic bullet when you go into the doctor's office. I think overprescribing is a problem that we have in a lot of different areas, but when you're focusing on pain, you need to focus on a bigger picture, on other things that are going to help get you back on the right track, and that could be physical therapy or exercise therapy. A lot of different options there. Some of the side effects, again, we've kind of hit this pretty hard. I'd want to emphasize that your body does get used to a lot of these medications as you've been taking it, so a lot of the side effects do go away right away. That would be a lot of times your dizziness, drowsiness, nausea, itching. Constipation's one that's always going to be there. Constipation will never go away as a side effect with pain medications. The one in red there, respiratory depression, that's the scariest one we're worrying about. That's the one that's going to be potentially leading to death. So I would say anytime, pain medication or not, if you're having difficulty breathing, I'd get in somewhere as soon as you possibly can. Excuse me. This is kind of a busy slide. I just want to emphasize here, you can see right on that cusp, you get to euphoria, you're passing the withdrawal symptoms, you hit euphoria, which is a lot of times what people with addictions would be looking for. Right after that is when you're getting into that video that showed kind of the glazed over look, the clammy sweating, you can pass out, be snoring. That's when we're going to want to treat with naloxone. Naloxone on the next slide here, it's going to come up for me. Oh, there we go. So what is naloxone? You saw it earlier, that little nasal spray that popped up. This is the emergency reversal agent. It only works if there's pain medication in the body. If we give it to anybody who's passed out, if Grandpa Keith has fallen asleep in his rocking chair and he's snoring and we think that maybe he overdosed, if we gave him naloxone nasal spray, nothing bad's going to happen. It's just going to give him a runny nose maybe. Outside of that, if there's a pain medication involved, they're going to hit all of those stages of withdrawal as soon as that naloxone hits. Again, it only lasts for a short amount of time, 30 minutes to 2 hours, but they're going to feel just awful. And they're going to go from that euphoric state, feeling like $1 million, to all of a sudden being in with full withdrawal, that worst flu they've ever had in their life, angry, combative potentially, but they're going to be alive. So that's one of the important things. It is safe for children and pregnant females. That's a very big statement for a pharmacist to say. It is very rarely do we ever test medications on children or pregnant females, but the opposite of this would be death. And so this has been studied. This is something that if you're saving a life, absolutely use it. Use it on a pregnant female. Use it on a kid. There's no misuse potential on this. Again, if someone gets this dose, they're feeling awful after it if they have pain medications in their system. So it's not something that people are abusing or trying to get to new levels of their high. It's something that doesn't feel pleasant for them whenever it's administered. Naloxone, again, is only effective in reversing those opioid crises. So if someone's passed out, pinpoint pupils, not breathing well, that's what we're looking for. This next slide, I know we've touched on this some already, but it's going to be a big thing. Is going to be a lack of response. If they're not answering to you calling, you can rub your knuckles on their chest. That should wake just about anybody up. Grandpa Keith, I'd hope that in that situation you'd pop right out of your nap, but it's something that should wake them up. That being said, there'd also probably be some potential pills or needles around, that's going to be a pretty big indicator that this is an overdose situation, and naloxone is going to be the best next option. So April, this is just last week, April 2018, the Surgeon General put out a recommendation that more Americans need to carry naloxone. Like you saw in that previous presentation, you're more likely to die from an opioid overdose than a car accident. That's a pretty scary statistic. I wouldn't say it's going to be just every person. It's going to be if you have someone in your life that you know has addiction, or you think someone has addiction, this would be a valid option that you can do. A lot of pharmacies are starting to do this. I know that Thrifty White is in Pocahontas is one that if you wanted to go in and get a prescription, there's a state protocol that you can go in and say, yes, I want to get a prescription for naloxone. They're going to walk you through the different options. These are a couple different available products. I've got the next slide here. So I'm going to go through these really quick just so you guys know the difference. So when you're going in, you know what to ask for. Okay, well, the first one there, it's got a lot of, you can see it's got a lot of pieces. And it's ended up, it turns out that it's actually a nasal spray, but you've got to take apart a couple different pieces and put it together. For me, I would think that in an emergency situation, I might not be able to put all those things together calmly. I might be fumbling around and cause a problem. That being said, those are not overly expensive, but they're definitely, I don't know, probably 60 to 80 bucks the last time I had looked. The next product is the Narcan nasal spray. It comes in a box of 2. It's going to be a 1 spray 1 time. If you take it out of the box and you push that little plunger down and a little stream of liquid comes out the top, that's your dose. You just wasted it. There's a second one in there. Don't do it a second time for sure. But it's a pack of 2. You put it in someone's nostril, sprayed up there. You should have a response in 2 to 3 minutes. If you don't, you do that second spray. You need to be calling 911 and getting this person to the hospital as soon as possible. That product is right around $150 last I checked. Then there's the vial and syringe method, which is the next one. and you'd have to draw up if you're comfortable with vials, comfortable with syringes. That one normally isn't too expensive. Same situation though. You'd be administering it into a deep muscle. 2 to 3 minutes, you should have a response. Can do a second dose, but wanting to get them to the emergency room right away. The very last product there, it's real fancy. It's a brand name product. It's on the very end here. If you open that up, it's going to start talking to you, and it's going to say, place this product on your leg. Press firmly, does a countdown, administers the dose. It might even tell you to call 911. That product is about $4,000. I wouldn't suggest getting that one, but that being said, it's pretty slick. I've never suggested that for anybody, but it's certainly an option and out there. So some of these stats you've seen, but the average age for the overdoses that we're seeing is roughly 20 years old. I want to really emphasize, I know this came up before, the most common sources of prescriptions were friends and relatives. So the people who are having problems are most likely going to be getting these prescription products from you. I have a couple different suggestions. I know that we mentioned the medication safety cabinet before, or the medicine cabinet. I'd like to not refer to it as a medicine cabinet because anything stored in that a lot of times loses its potency a lot quicker than what it would normally, just because there's so much humidity in the bathroom. So that being said, this is something I talk to all my patients about. I say, where do you store your medications? You know, they obviously know what medications they would have because that's what we're talking about. But that being said, if someone's in your home looking for medications, there's a few spots that I know that was told to me by a DEA officer in Omaha. They look in the kitchen, they look in the bathroom, and then they look in the nightstand next to the bed. So if I was to suggest, I'd say keep it out of those 3 spots, and I'd keep it in a lock secure cabinet. I know if you always have eyes on your kitchen, that's always an option, but I'd always say the safest option is going to be lock secure. It's very, my wife, when we had our child, she had a short prescription for an opioid pain medication. I think she maybe took like a dose or 2, and then in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, where the pharmacist would not suggest to put it, is where it went. And it was there for a year. And this is my daughter. At that year mark, I said, why do we have this in there? This is a dangerous medication. I need to make sure that any medication that a kid gets into has a chance of causing all kinds of bad things. If they got into a vitamin and ate the entire thing of Flintstone vitamins, they're going to have a problem, and it can potentially cause death for anything. It takes a lot less of an opioid to cause a problem for a little kid. So for my daughter, and it took a year. I mean, that first year was busy. I don't remember all of it. I'm gonna be honest with you, but that first year I said, okay, I need to put my money where my mouth is, and we need to get rid of this. And so disposing of medications is what we're going to transition to now. It's this MedDrop disposal box is what we have at Broadlawns. It took me a little bit to get this installed, and I did find out Thrifty White actually has this exact same unit. You can take all your medications here and dump it in that box, and it gets sent off. You don't have to worry about it. This is where I would suggest you go home tonight, or if it's too late tonight, tomorrow morning you go through and clean out all of your medications that have been sitting around for a year that you don't take anymore. You know they're expired. Any pain medication from a surgery that you're not using, take it to one of these stations. Get it in one of these safe disposal boxes. You can also, there's another suggestion that the FDA has is that you can throw it away with the regular trash. You just want to put it in something that no one wants to dig through. Coffee grounds, kitty litter. If someone's getting in the trash and they're digging through some kitty litter, I would think that they're extremely desperate, but that normally is a pretty good deterrent for a lot of that. Flushing it down the toilet is no longer an option. Probably about 15 years ago, that's what was FDA recommended. That's starting to show back up in the water supply quite a bit. I do know in Nebraska there was so much birth control being flushed down the toilet that all of the water had just a trace amount of female hormone in it. So all of the gentlemen didn't appreciate that once we found it out. but it's something that is a problem. And so avoiding flushing these things down the toilet, and these are, again, that site was listed of all the places that you can take it to dispose of it. Real important that I took the liberty of doing some local ones, that, and again, Thrifty White in Pocahontas has that exact same unit, but there's a lot of sheriff stations. Every county has a disposal site. If you're ever having a question, talk to your pharmacy, talk to your sheriff station, talk to your local PD. They'll be able to direct you to the right spot. I'm just going to touch briefly here. I know this has been discussed quite a bit. An illicit opioid or an illegal opioid, anything that's taken outside of how it's been prescribed is illegal. If you're taking one tablet every or 3 times a day and you start taking it 4 or 5 times a day, technically that's illegal. You're outside of the confines of what that provider has suggested for you. If someone else takes that medication from you, it's another federal crime. Heroin is going to be obviously an illicit opioid. In pharmacy school, believe it or not, I didn't learn anything about carfentanil. I had no clue that it was used as an elephant tranquilizer. So the first time I heard it was going to be on the news. And so I would guess that probably 10 years ago, if I would say hydrocodone, oxycodone, fentanyl, hydromorphone, nobody in the audience would have heard of any of those things. And routine exposure and constant attention and the fact that you're more likely to die from an opioid now than a car accident, this is second nature for a lot of people. So I guess I just emphasize, be cautious, know what's out there, and if you know that someone has a problem, you're going to want to get a resource to get them to help as soon as you possibly can. I think these were touched on as well, but the 3% is what is reported that people who are using medications outside of how they're prescribed or stealing them or something along those lines is roughly 3% in Iowa, and that's the same percent as the national average. Again, our numbers are shooting up a lot faster than the national average. Deaths, and there's a couple different reports here, 247 in 2010 and 214, and this is from prescription opioids only, not heroin. This is just something that was prescribed by a physician. These are the deaths that are associated with it. Those numbers are going up, but I would say that right now we're starting to see a shift from prescription side to heroin starting to have a lot more of a climb and a little bit of a decline on the prescription side. That can be a lot of different things, the PMP and some of these physicians losing their license or retiring early. There's some things that are happening, but we're hoping to get these numbers down even more. So some of the things that we're doing at Broadlawns, we recently have written a grant to try and get coverage for naloxone for people who would not have access for it if their insurance doesn't pay for it, or if it's a family member that knows that their significant family or friend or member of their household is having a problem. We're going to try and get funding so that they would actually be able to get training and a naloxone product. We've been reaching out to some first responders. So the Polk County Sheriff's Department came in and we talked to them, and not surprisingly, they had been using this, and they had actually used several doses of naloxone, but they wanted to get more of their deputies trained, and so we got more in, and we're hoping to hear back on the grant towards the end of May, early June, and be able to help out a lot more of those first responders. Education things, this is, I feel like this is a great event that you guys have here. Obviously, all you guys are concerned citizens and looking for your best way to serve your community, and God bless small town Iowa, because we're going to get this done. We're going to be, Broadlands also is going to be at the pain management center where I work. We're doing the lowest effective dose. We're trying to do the shortest duration of treatment. There's a lot of different things that we look at for patients, and we're always watching that PMP. We're pretty rigorous with all of our testing, and then we just started up a medication-assisted therapy treatment program, which was mentioned earlier, and then We also have addiction services that are available on site too. So we try to have the full circle, and again, for having the pharmacist and clinical psychologist on staff, it's just not a very common thing. And I was very blessed when Broadlands brought me on and said, hey, we want you to work in the pain clinic full time. So now that I'm utilized just for things like this, going out and do education and trying to find different ways that we can serve our community. So I know we're saving questions for the end, but here's some of the different websites and resources for you.
Thanks, Jarek. And one of the things we really want you to know before the evening's over is where's the local help? And so Corey's going to come and share with us. Carrie, thanks.
I think, yep, I am. Well, I'm Corey Keller, and I am a certified prevention specialist with Community and Family Resources. So I'm just going to really quickly talk about some local services that are going on right now. But I also want to say that right now we get so many calls, so many requests for presentations. What's going on? What can we do? How did we get here? But we don't get a lot of people saying, well, then let's do something. And so when I got a call a couple months ago from the group here that wanted to not only learn, but okay, well then let's do something about it. We don't get that often. So for you guys to put this on is just so fantastic. And that's number one, right? In prevention, what we do at Community and Family Resources, it's all about education. You guys coming here and then trickling through the community and then letting other people know what you learned about and bringing that there and being your best advocates. Right? Pat had kind of mentioned in the United States, we make about 5-6% of the world's population or something like that. We take around 75% of the prescription medications and about 95% of the pain medications. That's a lot of pain medications we're taking, and they're beneficial. They help us, absolutely. However, we need to be our best advocates. Right? We've got that vital sign now, what's your pain level at the doctor? And we sometimes challenge people to look at pain this way now. So if I really ask you guys, if you play along with me and pretend here, you're sitting and I ask you, how much pain are you in right now? Everyone could probably think of a spot that's kind of painful. You're sitting on sort of, wood on your back, you've been sitting for a while, maybe your shoulder aches or something. The majority of you would probably find something that sort of hurts. Right? Fair enough to say. But if I shift that and I ask, well, how comfortable are you? Oh, right, I'm sitting on cushion. Right? Could be worse. So when our doctors, our primary doctors, our dentists, or whoever are asking us, well, what's your pain level? Rank that on 1 to 10 on the smiley face. Let's be our best advocates and shift that in our head. Well, how comfortable am I? If I just had a surgery and my guts were out on the table, I'm going to be uncomfortable, obviously. But sometimes we want that immediate fix. It's a culture we've created sometimes, unfortunately, right? There's a quick fix for everything. So if I can recognize that pain can be okay sometimes, right? And I want to be honest with my physicians of what my pain level is at. I want to be my best advocate. And then I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I do want you guys to think, in the last 10 years or so, and you can raise your hand if you want, who has been prescribed a prescription pain medication? It would probably be a large majority of people, whether it's from a C-section or a tooth being pulled or something. And how many of you did not finish that prescription? Probably a large percentage. And then when you realized you weren't going to take any more, how many of you immediately took it out of your home? Then no hands go up, right? Good. I have one person. Right, so our medication, not only opioids, but all prescription pain medications need to be removed from our house if we're not being used, and they need to be taken out of medicine cabinets. When we talk to our youth, unfortunately right now, when we survey youth, the perception of harm with pain medications is so low. Right, alcohol, they know the dangers. Marijuana, they recognize the dangers. That should be higher, but they recognize the dangers, right? Other illegal drugs, they know the dangers. With prescription drugs, they think, oh, my mom has it in the cabinet. My brother got it from a doctor. I know my grandpa takes this. That perception of harm is so low. So they're not getting the medications from drug dealers, or they're not driving to Fort Dodge. They're getting them from grandma's medicine cabinets. or mom's medicine cabinets or wherever. So they need to be coming out of our house and not kept there. That's really important. We need to be having those conversations with our youth and with each other. So some of the stuff right now that's going on locally in our communities, we are implementing the Too Good for Drugs curriculum program at all of the schools in Pocahontas, the elementary level, both the Catholic and the public school. We do a children of substance abuse group and curriculum at South Central Calhoun Elementary School in Rockwell City. We're doing prevention services with all the elementary schools in Humboldt, both at St. Mary's and Taft. We go into the health classes at most of the counties. And so that's just some of the stuff we're doing, but right now we're really focusing on prescription drugs, both legal and illegal, the perception of harm. If I'm prescribed them myself, how do I take them? So that's really important to start with youth. And we're looking to do more presentations with adults. Because unfortunately, I'm getting a lot of the youth and they're having to go home and educate their parents because they're going, oh my gosh, my uncle's got all this back pain and my mom always asks him for some when she can't sleep. Right? So it's just important that we are continuously going into the schools and doing those programs. And we are always available for presentations with Community Family Resources. Those are always free of charge. So if you have a group or you have a workplace, you want just some more information, not just on opioids, but any different drug topic, any other medication, let us know that. If you want to start a coalition, you want to start a group with people you know, let us know and we can help you do that. That's all important. So if you do have someone that is struggling, does need treatment in the area, Community Family Resources is a local treatment provider. Our residential facility and large outpatient facility is in Fort Dodge. And fortunately, we now have walk-in evaluations in Fort Dodge, which is awesome because a lot of people who realize, okay, yeah, I do need treatment, they're not gonna wanna call and make an appointment and go, okay, I'll go tomorrow. They want it right now. So we do have walk-in evaluations. And then someone who maybe lives out in this area who's going to do extended outpatient, we do have outpatient facilities in all of the counties that we service. So someone is in Pocahontas once a week, someone's in Humboldt once a week, Rockwell City, so on and so forth. So that's a great service so they don't have to drive so far. Something else coming sort of on the cusp, in this area, they had talked about medicated assistance treatment, meaning it's a lot easier for someone coming off of an opioid or heroin to take Suboxone or methadone because that withdrawal is so painful. That's not something we really have in this area, but that is something that hopefully is going to be coming into this area. Hopefully that will improve some recovery. So we're hoping for that pretty soon. Also, we talked about Narcan and naloxone. I know that those words were interchanged. I know sometimes people in the field, we always say those and we assume people know what we're talking about. It's the same medication. It's just the generic brand and the non-generic brand. But as we mentioned, pharmacies now, they have a standing order for Narcan. So we can go into Thrifty White and I could say, you know, I have a family member who is struggling. I'm afraid they're going to overdose. I want this in my house. If you're uncomfortable administering it, of course, they're going to do a little training with you too, but I do have a sign-up sheet that will be in the information table in the back. If you wanted to do a training or you have a group that wanted to do a training, you had a group of nurses that you wanted to do a training, we can provide that for you guys because we're certified trainers, because that can be kind of scary stuff doing that. And the other important thing that people know about Narcan is that unfortunately sometimes people can get kind of sue happy. We know that in the United States. And so if someone was overdosing and I administered Narcan to them and they came out of it and they got mad that I did that, I'm not liable for doing that. They can't turn around and sue me for it. And I also can't really harm them. So that's something, because sometimes people are afraid to intervene and help somebody out, but I wouldn't be liable for that. So that's important. But, you know, big takeaways is participate in the take-back events that the police and sheriff's departments put on. Take stuff to Thrifty White, not only prescription medications, but over-the-counter medications. They were recently having some string of thefts in Humboldt County, and some females, they were stealing large amounts of Imodium. They're going, that's weird. Why are they doing that? And one of the women ended up in the hospital, and it turns out that Imodium taken in really large quantities acts in your body like an opioid. So that's, you know, you don't think of those types of things, but any of those medications, even over the counter laying around, if you're noticing or missing, you know, just be aware of that those medications can be abused too. So with that, I know that you guys have a lot of questions, but we do ask when you guys leave, we have tons of information in the back, and so Community and Family Resources pamphlet is back there. So, you know, if you do have someone that you know that might need help, take that or take our card. And with that, I think that you were going to grab those questions, and we were going to, thank you.
I'm going to invite the ushers now to come down the rows here, and if you've got questions, hand them to the end of the aisles, and they'll pick up those questions. We'll take as many as we can, but also we orchestrated some refreshments afterwards, so you can talk to our presenters that are here and share, ask them maybe specifically if your question doesn't get addressed or identified here. I'm going to introduce you to Marge Kahn. She's a member of our congregation. She's been the chair of the committee, ministry team that has put this program together. It was a result of our conversations with our local police force in Pomeroy, where Lori said, one of the big issues we're facing is opioids, meth, marijuana, 30 and 40-year-olds. It's not the teenagers. It's the middle-agers. And so that's where our research started, and that's why this has resulted. Come, Marge, and lead our question and answer time.
Thank you all for coming. I hope you've learned something tonight. I know I have, and there's plenty of pamphlets back there with Corey. I do want to take a moment to, I know a lot of you might recognize these names of people that were on this outreach team and have helped put this event together. We have Sherry Nesbitt, who is doing our PowerPoint tonight, and she also did a lot of our press releases. Deb Garber was the person that greeted you as you came in tonight. She's on the team. Melanie Nesbitt is an ISU student that she has participated with us, but she's at college right now. And John Hutchins was out in the parking lot and heading that up. And I do want to thank all of those people. Our tech team, it wouldn't been for them, they wouldn't have had all this stuff going. So Dean Christoffers, I see Bob Duggar, Eric Lance. We also have Craig Aljets from the properties team that helped out a lot. Jen Pearson, Director of Children and Youth, has helped us along the way. Nina Van Gorp is back with the Covenant Women when you go back to get your snack. Ellen Lance has been around taking pictures for us. Dawn Fullerton is the head of the prayer team. And we want to thank the ushers, too, tonight for helping. And I think one of the most important people, for me anyway, is our secretary, Joni Gertis, who really, anytime we wanted anything printed or run off or call a newspaper for an ad, Joni was always there, and that really makes everything run really, really smoothly. Corey Keller has been great. When we got Corey Keller and I got in contact with her, she came to every one of our meetings that we had, and she provided a lot of information to us and really helped us coordinate this tonight. And of course, this person right here to my right, he was always with us, backed us up, giving us encouragement and support along the way. So I want to thank all of those people for, it's a big job to put on an event. And I'm so glad that so many of you took your time tonight to come and hear these great speakers. Okay, I don't know which one of you wants to answer this question. Where does the focus of the war on opioids need to be? And does insurance limit length and number of treatments? So maybe that first question, where does the focus of the war on opioids need to be?
I always hate the phrase war on opioids, but I really think it can't be just enforcement focused. It can't be just talking about the doctors. It can't be just, it really needs to be all of the above, kind of like that Chinese menu. You got to pick one of everything. You got to hit treatment, because there are a lot of folks that are getting addicted, not because of choice, but because they get kind of drug into it by circumstance. So you got to have prevention efforts to try and get ahead of the curve So really think of it as kind of our current fight, the future fight, and the far fight. And really the current fight, you got to have enforcement, you got to have treatment to deal with the folks who are currently addicted, and you got to have prevention efforts to try and keep the next generation from being addicted. So I think it really has to be all three components.
Yes, the second one was, does insurance limit length and number of treatments?
Yes, they do. And that is from a personal standpoint, from what we dealt with Brittany, insurance is a fight because treatment is expensive. And like I said, you know, the 30-day programs in that, in my opinion, just from what I've seen, aren't long enough for them because they're not clean by the time they get out. Most insurance companies, if you can get them to cover you for 21 or 28 days, you're doing pretty good. So they have to be the treatment centers have to be creative about how they get the insurance companies to help pay for it. A lot of insurance companies are going to saying, we will only pay for outpatient treatment. They will not pay for inpatient treatment anymore. The insurance companies have to be fought on this because these people need treatment. I don't know why they don't grasp the fact that, okay, I can tell you from Brittany's standpoint, she was in the ER 6 times in 2016. Every one of those ER visits is $1,500 to $2,500, and she's there 45 minutes. So they're spending as more money to treat them in an emergency standpoint than what they're going to get them treatment and keep them clean.
Why won't Medicaid pay for recovery drugs?
Because they're expensive. There are some that they will cover, but normally it's a fight as far as prior authorizations would go, and a lot of times cost is a big factor. I know that it is a conversation that's happening at Medicaid offices, and I know that a lot of different groups that are pushing for different coverage for medication-assisted treatment, for longer inpatient stays potentially, but it's a lot of times an uphill battle. So.
And also, every state is different on Medicaid coverage. For instance, Vivitrol is, I know, covered in Wisconsin. I think it's covered in Illinois at a relatively low payment. It's not covered here. Every state in the nation has their own Medicaid program because it's a federally reimbursed program of the states. So every state sets their own rules as to what's on their Medicaid coverage or what's not. It's kind of like if you go to your doctor has a formulary of what medication they want to go to, and then you go to the VA and say, hey, I want to get my medication through the VA. VA says, hey, this medication is not on our formulary, so we're going to give you this generic of something else that's going to do hopefully the same thing. So it really is it's a state issue that has to be resolved that way.
How long does it take to get sober? Days, months, years, once the drug is in your system without relapse?
Most people will tell you that it's 60 days plus to get the drugs completely out of your system, and it's pretty much a lifetime fight from that point.
If we are slowly weaning them down on their doses, a lot of times we're looking at, it depends on how long they've had treatment and how high their dose is. If there's a reason why we've stopped them, we're slowly going to be weaning them down over time, or sometimes we do it real quick over a month and we give them withdrawal medications as a supplement, and depends, a lot of times a week to 2 weeks for our patients, but there's different situations that it can last significantly longer. So it a lot of times depends on your chemical makeup too, but everybody's going to be a little bit different for that.
Just to review, Narcan again, says Patrick.
Yeah, Narcan or naloxone is a reversal agent. So basically, if someone is suffering an overdose of an opioid, Narcan will knock that opioid off the receptor in their brain and reverses it immediately. And as our pharmacist friend said, it puts you immediately into withdrawal. So every one of those withdrawal symptoms happens right away. So the body cam video that I've seen of officers that are on the street when Narcan is administered, the fight is on frequently because it's it is a very quick, they come out of it and they're not happy about it.
In my,
I don't know.
So a couple things with that. You'll want to make sure that it's at room temperature. I would say that a lot of times it's good for about a year. But what I tell patients is if it's 6 months expired and it's me on an opioid overdose, you better be administering that to me. If it's 6 months expired, it's better than nothing. A lot of times it's going to be what the shelf life is, and a lot of times when it comes from a pharmacy, it's going to be a year from the date that you got it, or if it's a shorter what's on the box. Sometimes it'll be a little bit longer, but again, something's better than nothing. I'd replace it as soon as you can, whenever it's expired, a lot of times a year.
I think we've kind of answered this, but what can family do if they think a relative is using or selling drugs?
encourage them to get help, number one. And don't stop encouraging them. Like I think all of us have touched on, it's very, very rare that they're going to go through treatment one time and be successful. Most of them are going to go through multiple times. At some point, if they are able to get clean, it's going to click one time. It may be their 6th or 8th or 10th or 15th time through a treatment program, but keep encouraging them to get help. So don't ignore it.
I'd also say talk to their primary care physician too. If you suspect something or you know something's going on and their primary care physician is still writing for something, that's going to be an excellent first point of contact because there's going to be some big changes at that point.
And then one other thing with that though, because I know we do have some law enforcement here, and lately I've been getting lots of feedback. I suspect my neighbor might be, selling, and I called the police, and nothing happened right away. There's a lot that comes to that. If I call law enforcement and I say there was a suspicious car outside, I'm not going to see law enforcement kicking down the door 10 minutes later. That's not how things work. It doesn't happen that easy, but it is okay to call. I'm seeing frequent visitors. They're coming at this time. They're probably aware already, law enforcement, but, maybe it gives them a little bit more of a pattern of what's going on. But, you can't expect that law enforcement can go kicking down doors when we suspect or maybe even know something. So just, making sure that we still keep that communication open. But, I've been getting a lot of sort of that feedback too, so.
Where is the walk-in clinic in Fort Dodge?
Yeah, good question. So again, the pamphlets will have the exact information, but our outpatient clinic that someone can get an evaluation, it's on 31st Avenue in Fort Dodge, and it's right by the Sports Page restaurant. Most people are familiar with that, so right out there. So that is where they can go in there.
Thanks, Corey. If someone smokes, do they have less likelihood of pain meds to work?
What I have found, and when I first started the pain clinic, I'd always see a note that the physicians that encouraged smoking cessation because their natural ability to deal with pain was actually less if they're smoking. I had to confirm it because that hadn't been anything I've heard of before. There's some studies out there that they find if you're smoking, your body's natural ability to deal with pain is less. So you're going to be in more pain if you're smoking. One more piece of ammo that I like to give a lot of patients to try and encourage them to quit smoking. A lot of health benefits, but one of the big things is you'll have a lower daily pain score.
Okay, Bob, this is a comment for you. Thank you for sharing your story when everything is so fresh in your life, and God be with you. We do appreciate you being here under the circumstances. Jarek, when giving the naloxone, you said they could be combative. How soon after administrating do they become that way, and how do you protect yourself?
I think we got that one.
I think so.
Away.
Just run. Just run away.
I can tell you from experience, I had 2, in the 20 years I did it, heroin wasn't a big thing, or opiates weren't a big thing at that point. I had 2 opiate overdoses, and whenever you give Narcan, you were ready for a fight because they were coming up swinging, and it was seconds. You give them Narcan IV, give it through their IV, literally you're talking 5 seconds and they're coming up swinging. So, and they're mad because you just ruined their high. And another thing too that I noticed, or Dr. Schmunk and I, who's the Polk County Medical Examiner, we're talking about the new thing that they're starting to watch for is on their testing for Narcan in opiate deaths, because they're finding that a lot of these people are they're overdosing, they're going to the ER, or they're being treated pre-hospital with Narcan, they're going to the ER, they're being discharged, they're going back out and getting high again and overdosing again. So now they've got not only the narcotics, but they've got Narcan in their system, they're finding trace amounts of Narcan in their system, and they're overdosing when they're leaving the hospital. That's something that they're starting to see more and more of again. That was kind of an interesting thing that I seen them starting to watch for.
What support groups are available for parents with addicted children, and specifically in the Des Moines area, but around here too, perhaps, Corey?
And I'm sure, Bob, this is more of a question for you, but I had mentioned that the two women, but you know them, so why don't you go ahead and filter that? So.
Honestly, that was one of the things that we really had a hard time when we were going through this with Brittany, because it's hard to track down support groups. They definitely have a lot of different meetings in that for the people that have addictions, but it was hard to find something that was specific to drug addictions for parents in that. We were actually, Sherry, that was one of our things that we were actually trying to get set up, and I know there are a couple women in Des Moines, Nikki Dean, she's done there's been an article I think in the Des Moines Register about her son was one of the 3 they called the Lost Boys. She has set up a group for a parent support group, and I have her actual contact information. I will try to email it to you two so that you can send that information out in the Des Moines area. That's one that's kind of hard to do a Google search for, and so that's something that's one of the areas with the coalition that I'm involved in Polk County that we're trying to do is get those support groups set up so that parents have a resource and a place to go and ask those questions and find out, what do we do? There's not a book for this, so you're flying by the seat of your pants a lot of time. So.
And that's what Al's been doing with Crush as well. That's the same kind of approach, to try and get communities of people together. And it's a lot of folks in recovery, folks who are having kids who are suffering from addiction, and that's really what that Crush program is all about as well. So that would be another one to reach out to Al Fear, or just send me an email and I can get you in touch with Al.
Checking out our time, I just want to say, if you have any other questions, our guest speakers will be in the back. We do want you to stay and have a little treat and talk with each other. And Pastor Dan will have something else to say at the end. Boy, some of these pamphlets are really good, so I hope you take time to look at the table. Talking to kids about prescription drug abuse, talking about prescription drug misuse. And I was talking to one of our people earlier in the evening. You know, this one was kind of interesting to me because it's signs of medication misuse, you know, like maybe some older people that might be living by themselves or something. Sometimes they just get mixed up. They take their pill in the morning and then, oh, did I take that? Maybe I should take it again. Oh, maybe not. And there are some signs to look for so that, you know, you might say, well, maybe, you know, maybe they need to be a little more monitoring. And then maybe some of the kids mentioned to Jen, well, what is an opioid really again? Boy, this is a good one, the danger of prescription drug abuse. But there's a lot of information out on those tables, and I know Corey would love to have you all take a lot of these and then, you know, show your friends and relatives too. Thank you.
And one last curious person said, Jerick, is your mother Dawn Renee? Yes, that would be true. We are delighted that you came. We want to thank you that you came and are with us sharing together. We did record this on video, and it is been broadcast live. It also will be on our YouTube channel. So if you go to Evangelical Covenant Church of Pomeroy, and then just look it up in the YouTube channel, it will be there. And you have our permission to use it if you want to show it at a group or small group, or, hey, this is what went on there. Some of the takeaways we talked about, warning signs, what are we looking for, right? You got quite a few of those referred to. Simple remedies, like get those medicines either in a very safe place or out in public where you can monitor what's going on with them. Disposal of medication. We want to thank Thrifty White tonight, printed our bulletins for us, and then they have a take-back place, and any of their stores will have that, but also there are others around, and use those. Community and Family Resources has tons of ability to help. And one of the things was further education. I would encourage you to respond by saying, can I bring this to my church? Can I bring this to my youth group? Can I bring this to my study group that I'm part of? And call Corey, and if she can't come, she will certainly recommend you other resources so that the education part of this can go. We've talked about prevention and treatment and enforcement, and all of those are available in our area, so we want you to use them. There is coffee, some refreshments, cookie, and you're welcome to stay. Yeah, will you guys stand? Local law enforcement officers that are here tonight. Do you have one comment you want to make or anything? And we thank you for taking your time and the energy to be here on this evening. Let's just close with a word of prayer. Remind you that there are prayer teams, and there is a spiritual side to all of these things. And the resources here in the power of prayer and the resource of Christ and the Holy Spirit. Father, we thank you for this evening. I thank you for everyone who's come and our presenters. We ask that you guide and direct us in trying to help in this epidemic problem. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.